In today's episode, we're looking at what happens when wealth and ego collide with the deadliest mountain on Earth. From ignoring severe altitude sickness warnings to struggling with frozen, malfunctioning oxygen systems in sub-zero winds while continuing upward alone, these climbers made choices that proved fatal. It was May 14th, 2015. On Everest's northeast ridge, above the upper camps, climbers prepared for a summit push. Pre-dawn darkness, high winds and blowing snow reduced visibility to near zero. Temperatures were far below freezing, and the steep, exposed terrain left little room for error. Garrett Holbrook, 43, was the founder of a successful analytics company and had limited high-altitude climbing experience. He had completed a single major ascent several years earlier, but had ambitious goals for Everest. Holbrook hired a budget outfitter rather than an established expedition operator and planned to climb above the highest camps without supplemental oxygen or a support team. He sought a rapid summit time and often dismissed traditional guidance as overly cautious. Against repeated advice from guides, he intended to navigate the most dangerous sections alone, relying on GPS rather than visible route markers. The ridge terrain between the upper camps included steep ice slopes, narrow ledges, and exposed faces. Winds reached extreme velocities, driving a spindrift snow across the surface and reducing sightlines to near zero. Temperatures were well below freezing, and the combination of high altitude and exposure created conditions where even small errors could quickly become fatal. In the death zone, oxygen levels are severely reduced, and prolonged exposure can rapidly impair judgment, coordination, and decision-making. Weather reports had warned of high winds, and several other teams had already turned back at lower camps. Despite the warnings, Holbrook continued past the fixed ropes, moving into terrain that required careful step-by-step navigation. He relied solely on his GPS device to follow the route, rather than descending to regain the established line marked by prior climbers. Tracking data later indicated he had drifted several hundred yards east of the correct path, placing him above exposed ice slopes that dropped sharply to either side. Attempting to traverse back across a steep, 60-degree incline without fixed protection, he lost secure footing on wind-scoured blue ice. During the fall, loose ice and small rock fragments were dislodged, striking the slope and contributing to additional impacts. The uneven and unstable terrain increased the force of each collision, while wind and spindrift snow reduced friction and made footing more unpredictable. These conditions compounded the injuries sustained and made it clear that any attempt to regain balance or slow the fall would have been extremely difficult. The slip initiated a long, uncontrolled fall. The initial impact shattered both legs and caused severe cranial trauma as he struck jagged rock outcroppings. Momentum carried him further down the slope, and successive impacts fractured his spine and caused extensive soft tissue injuries. Drag marks in the snow indicated that he attempted to crawl or move after the fall, suggesting he remained conscious for several moments despite massive trauma. Blood loss, combined with sub-zero temperatures and altitude-related exhaustion, eventually overcame him, leading to rapid unconsciousness and death. A local guide discovered Holbrook's body during a search initiated after he failed to check in with the base camp. Helicopter recovery was impossible due to altitude and ongoing storms, and the ground team required several hours to reach the site. Recovery operations were delayed by poor visibility and technical terrain, taking multiple days to complete. An official post-mortem examination listed massive traumatic injuries and blood loss as the primary cause of death, with hypothermia and altitude-induced impairment noted as contributing factors. GPS data confirmed a significant deviation from the standard route. The incident received limited media coverage, and the family requested privacy. Holbrook's attempt highlighted the extreme risks of high-altitude climbing when standard safety practices are ignored. Soloing, foregoing supplemental oxygen, and relying on navigation tools rather than visual markers compounded the hazards. Extreme weather, steep terrain, and the physiological effects of the death zone leave little margin for error. This incident serves as a reminder of the importance of preparation, experience, and adherence to established protocols in one of the world's most unforgiving environments. It was April 28, 2017. On Everest's south route at the Hillary Step, climbers faced extreme conditions and heavy congestion. More than 40 people were stacked in single-file sections of the death zone, with freezing temperatures, strong winds, and limited oxygen. The narrow ridge left little room for error, and even small delays could become life-threatening. Marcus Fieldstone, 38, was a managing partner at a major investment firm who had publicly stated his goal of achieving a fast summit time for what he called a businessman record. His climbing experience was limited to indoor rock gym training, with no prior high-altitude experience. Although he had hired a professional guide service, he frequently disregarded safety protocols. Fieldstone's confidence and reliance on resources, rather than skill, reflected a common risk factor on Everest. Minimal experience, paired with the assumption that equipment could compensate for inexperience. He had chosen to climb during peak season when congestion on the South Col route was highest. Guides had briefed all clients on queue protocols, safety delays, and the risks of extended death zone exposure. Despite warnings and a narrow summit window, Fieldstone arrived at the Hillary step behind schedule and began pushing past other climbers on narrow sections, placing fixed ropes and oxygen lines at risk. At approximately 28,750 feet, Fieldstone attempted to pass a slower climber on a narrow ridge segment. In doing so, he unclipped from his safety rope without warning. The other climber's equipment caught his main oxygen line, severing the regulator. His backup regulator subsequently malfunctioned due to cold exposure, cutting off his supplemental oxygen supply entirely at high altitude. Without oxygen in the death zone, hypoxia developed rapidly, impairing judgment, coordination, and physical strength. Fieldstone lost the ability to maintain balance and was unable to respond effectively to the unstable terrain. Loose ice and small rock fragments were dislodged during the slip, striking the slope and contributing to additional impacts. The uneven and unstable surface increased the force of each collision, while wind and spin drift snow-reduced traction, compounding injuries and making any attempt to regain balance extremely difficult. The initial impact of the fall caused fractures to both legs and severe cranial trauma as he struck rock outcroppings along the ridge. Momentum carried him further down the slope, and successive impacts resulted in spinal fractures and extensive soft tissue injuries. Drag marks in the snow indicated that he attempted to crawl or adjust his position after the fall, suggesting he remained conscious for a brief period despite the severity of his injuries. The combination of massive blood loss, hypoxia, exhaustion, and sub-zero temperatures rapidly overwhelmed him, leading to unconsciousness and death. Nearby climbers were unable to assist effectively due to extreme exposure and narrow terrain, and any immediate rescue was rendered impossible by the slope and congestion. Local guides and expedition teams documented the incident and relayed information to base camp. Helicopter evacuation was not feasible due to altitude, terrain, and weather, and ground teams required several hours to reach Fieldstone safely. He was pronounced deceased on site from hypoxia, compounded by altitude exposure and minor fall injuries. Recovery was further complicated by congestion and difficult terrain, requiring careful coordination to prevent additional accidents. The incident highlighted the dangers of crowding and inexperience on Everest. Extended exposure in the death zone, combined with unsafe behaviors like bypassing established protocols, greatly increases risk. Oxygen failure, limited rescue options, and delayed response leave little room for error. Fieldstone's attempt underscores the importance of preparation, adherence to guide instructions, and respect for route safety. Even minor lapses in judgment or lack of high-altitude experience can have fatal consequences, showing that equipment and financial resources cannot replace proper training and decision-making. It was October 15th, 2014. On Everest's north face, heavy fresh snow had fallen in less than a day, creating extreme avalanche conditions. The northeast ridge featured steep slopes with sub-zero temperatures and strong winds, while unstable snow and visible wind slabs made the area highly hazardous, where even small disturbances could trigger a destructive avalanche. Roland Vasconcelos, 51, was an executive vice president at a major offshore energy company who had publicly stated his goal of climbing one of Everest's most technical routes to distinguish himself from what he called tourist climbers. His high-altitude experience was extremely limited, with only a single Mont Blanc ascent in 2012. He had hired a minimal support team to reduce costs and increase what he described as the authenticity of his achievement, but this also reduced safety margins. Vasconcelos' combination of confidence, lack of experience, and focus on exclusivity over safety reflected a common risk factor on Everest, attempting technical terrain well beyond one's skill level. The Northeast Ridge is among Everest's most avalanche-prone areas. Heavy, fresh snow had fallen within a short period, with temperatures well below freezing and strong wind gusts. Avalanche forecasts rated the slope as critically unstable, and local meteorologists recommended waiting several days for snow to stabilize. 2 other expedition teams had already postponed their climbs. Despite these warnings, Vasconcelos insisted on continuing to meet a personal schedule, dismissing professional guidance as overly cautious. He began his ascent early in the morning, opting to traverse a known avalanche slope rather than take a longer, safer route. While crossing the slope, Vasconcelos triggered a massive slab avalanche. The fracture propagated rapidly across the steep, snow-laden surface, releasing a large section of layered snow that swept him downslope in a high-speed debris flow. The snow carried ice chunks and small rocks with it, increasing the force of impact as it moved over uneven terrain. The avalanche accelerated quickly, funneling through natural gullies and channels on the mountain face, embedded in the turbulent mass of snow, ice, and rock. Vasconcelos was unable to deploy his beacon or arrest his fall. The shifting debris repeatedly tossed him against the slope, causing repeated impacts that contributed to fractures and bruising. The avalanche's force made it impossible for him to orient himself or use his hands or equipment to slow the descent. Snow and ice blocked his breathing passages intermittently during the slide, further impairing his ability to survive. The avalanche carried him a considerable distance before stopping in a crevasse. The compacting snow trapped him under dense layers of ice and debris, while chunks of rock and ice caused additional blunt force trauma. Even if he had remained conscious during parts of the fall, the combination of crushing pressure, repeated impacts, and sub-zero conditions quickly overwhelmed him. The surrounding snow hardened rapidly, preventing any immediate self-rescue and making extrication extremely difficult for rescue teams. A guide stationed in a safe area witnessed the avalanche and immediately radioed base camp. Rescue teams used beacon signals to locate the burial site within 45 minutes, but digging through the hardened debris took several hours. Vasconcelos's body was recovered later that day, showing traumatic injuries and signs of asphyxiation. Evacuation to advanced base camp occurred under continuing avalanche risk, requiring careful coordination. The coroner's report listed multiple blunt force injuries, as well as asphyxiation from burial, as the primary cause of death. Contributing factors included continuation, despite extreme avalanche conditions and route choice that exceeded his experience level. The incident was documented as a preventable avalanche fatality in official climbing statistics. The case underscores the dangers of attempting technical high-altitude routes without sufficient training, disregarding professional guidance, and prioritizing personal schedules or exclusivity over safety. It was May 8, 2016. On Everest's South Col route, Dr. Patricia Morehouse showed severe altitude sickness but refused to descend, demanding her guides continue the summit push. Temperatures were well below freezing. Winds swept the ridge, and oxygen was severely limited, making even small mistakes potentially fatal. Dr. Patricia Morehouse, 46, was the CEO of a biotech company and had publicly stated her goal of becoming the first pharmaceutical CEO to summit Everest. Her high-altitude experience consisted only of weekend hikes, yet she had invested in a premium expedition. Morehouse's medical degree led her to dismiss guide recommendations, believing her training in conventional medicine allowed her to self-assess altitude sickness. This overconfidence, combined with zero experience at extreme altitude, created a high-risk situation. Her decision-making prioritized personal achievement and publicity over safety, ignoring protocols designed to prevent fatal outcomes in the death zone. The South Col route presents extreme physiological challenges, even for acclimatized climbers. At this altitude, oxygen levels are greatly reduced, dehydration accelerates, and blood chemistry can become dangerous within hours. Early symptoms of high-altitude cerebral edema include headache, nausea, and loss of coordination, which can progress to confusion, coma, and death if untreated. Morehouse exhibited these warning signs at Camp 3, including severe headaches, nausea, and impaired balance. Guides recommended immediate descent, but she refused, claiming her medical training gave her authority over professional mountaineering advice. Despite warnings, Morehouse continued upward, Her neurological condition worsened rapidly, with increasing confusion, slurred speech, and loss of coordination. She stumbled repeatedly over uneven snow and ice, and her refusal to attach to safety ropes left her fully exposed on steep sections of the route. Guides attempted to redirect her multiple times, but she ignored instructions, moving toward areas with severe exposure. The combination of extreme altitude, low oxygens, and physical exhaustion magnified the effects of cerebral edema, reducing her ability to recognize danger. At one point, near the south summit approach, Morehouse moved toward a cliff edge with a steep drop. A guide intervened, restraining her just feet from the precipice and preventing an immediate fall. The physical struggle triggered a violent seizure as swelling in her brain increased intracranial pressure. During the seizure, her limbs flailed uncontrollably and she became unresponsive to verbal commands. Guides noted that she was partially disoriented, even when briefly conscious, unable to maintain balance, and exhibiting erratic behavior consistent with severe, high-altitude cerebral edema. The seizure lasted several minutes, during which her brain continued to swell within the confined skull, compressing brain tissue against the bone. This led to rapid onset of coma, and her breathing became irregular as brainstem function deteriorated. Attempts by guides to stabilize her were limited by the steep, exposed terrain and extreme environmental conditions. Even after she lost consciousness, she remained exposed to severe cold and low oxygen, further compounding the physiological damage. Respiratory arrest followed shortly thereafter, leaving her unresponsive despite continued rescue efforts. Guides initiated emergency descent procedures, but the damage was irreversible. Radio calls were made to request helicopter evacuation, though aircraft could only reach lower camps due to terrain and weather restrictions. Ground rescue teams reached Morehouse several hours later and confirmed her death from respiratory failure related to brain stem compression. Body evacuation to Kathmandu occurred through combined helicopter and ground transport. The coroner's report identified high-altitude cerebral edema with brain herniation as the primary condition, noting respiratory failure from brainstem compression as the cause of death. Contributing factors included rapid ascent without adequate acclimatization and refusal to descend despite clear medical indicators. The incident has since been used in high-altitude medicine training programs to demonstrate that conventional medical knowledge does not replace specialized expertise in extreme environments. It was March 22, 2018. On Everest's North Col route, temperatures were far below freezing. Sustained winds swept the exposed ridge, and oxygen levels were critically low. The steep, narrow terrain demanded precise navigation and reliable equipment, and even minor errors could quickly become life-threatening. Theodore Blackstone, 44, was a commercial real estate developer with substantial wealth who had become obsessed with modifying climbing equipment to improve its performance. His climbing experience was limited to intermediate peaks, yet he treated his technical knowledge as sufficient to redesign systems relied upon by high-altitude climbers for decades. He hired the expedition primarily for permits and logistics, intending to ascend independently with his custom oxygen system, disregarding guide recommendations and established safety protocols. His stated goal was to prove the superiority of his modifications, despite warnings that his system had already shown irregularities during pre-climb testing and was incompatible with standard backup equipment. The North Col lies in the death zone, where equipment failure can be fatal. Within minutes, Blackstone's custom system included modified flow rates and regulators untested in extreme cold. Guides and base camp specialists had repeatedly warned that the regulators could freeze and that backup protocols would not work with his modifications. Despite these cautions, he continued ascending when early malfunctions appeared at lower altitudes, confident he could repair the system on the mountain. At high altitude, Blackstone's custom oxygen regulator froze completely, and the backup system proved incompatible, leaving him without supplemental oxygen. He attempted field repairs in sub-zero conditions, struggling to manipulate the untested components. Removing his gloves exposed his fingers to immediate frostbite, while cold-induced numbness made fine motor tasks nearly impossible. During the attempt, several small parts slipped from his grasp and fell down the steep slope, leaving him unable to restore his oxygen flow. Hypoxia rapidly impaired his judgment and coordination, making it increasingly difficult to stabilize himself on the exposed ridge. As his oxygen deprivation worsened, Blackstone developed high-altitude pulmonary edema. He began coughing up frothy fluid and experienced severe shortness of breath, while confusion and muscle weakness made it impossible to maintain his balance on the narrow ice ledge. His hands and feet showed early signs of frostbite, further limiting his ability to manage the situation. Attempts to communicate with his climbing partner became incoherent as hypoxia progressed, and his physical weakness prevented him from self-arresting or retreating to safer terrain. Eventually, Blackstone collapsed, losing consciousness as his cardiovascular and respiratory systems failed. His climbing partner radioed for emergency assistance, but the combination of extreme altitude, steep terrain, and harsh weather delayed rescue. When a specialized recovery team finally reached his location, he had already succumbed to respiratory failure caused by hypoxia and pulmonary fluid buildup. The team noted extensive frostbite on his extremities, evidence of prolonged exposure, and signs that he had struggled to maintain a seated or stabilized position before collapse, illustrating the combined effects of equipment failure, severe cold, and prolonged oxygen deprivation. Body evacuation to base camp was completed under difficult conditions. The coroner's report cited high-altitude pulmonary edema and hypoxia as the primary causes of death, with contributing factors including equipment failure, frostbite, and extended exposure without oxygen. Post-incident analysis of the custom oxygen system confirmed predictable design flaws under extreme cold, demonstrating why proven high-altitude equipment should not be modified without extensive testing. The incident has since been used in mountaineering safety studies to illustrate the dangers of overconfidence, untested equipment, and ignoring expert guidance in the death zone.